Hello, I am so glad to welcome you to another one of our relationship ministry seminars. I'm very excited about this conversation that we're going to have today on grief. And by all means, if you're watching, if you are online on YouTube, on Facebook, just utilize the comment section. If you have a question for our presenters, by all means, just type your questions into the question box and we'll try our best to get to your questions by the end of the broadcast. But this hour is going to go by rather quickly, and so I don't want to waste any time. I'm just going to introduce to you all our panelists. Our first panelist is Miss Stephanie Grant, who currently is the chaplain manager or the manager of spiritual care at the Shady Grove Adventist Medical Center in Rockville. She is a mighty woman of God. She is compassionate. She's loving. She's caring. I even had the opportunity of teaching her in my, I think it was ethics or something like that. I taught that class to her, but I'm definitely glad to have her and her wealth of knowledge and experience. Our next one is Dr. Juleun Johnson. He's been with us before, but he is the director of mission and ministry at Florida Hospital. He is a healthcare chaplain, and he also is he runs the Built to Thrive podcast. And so I'm definitely glad to have Juleun back. And then lastly, I have my friend, Pastor Carl Brewer, who currently is the associate pastor at the Trinity Temple Seventh-day Adventist Church in Trenton, New Jersey. He is not only here because he's a pastor, but he's here because he's a certified grief recovery specialist, and he brings a wealth of knowledge to the table as it relates to dealing with people who may be grieving through this time. And so I just want to welcome all of them to the broadcast and let you all know that it's definitely good to have you all. And just in way of introduction, just share a little bit with us about what got you all into grief. And then Stephanie, we're going to go to you because Stephanie has this poem that she wanted to share. But we'll start with sort of the introductions as to what got you into grief. And I know your chaplains, you all can't avoid it, but still tell us what got you into it. Go on first, Carl.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. Well, first, just one quick clarification. Trinity Temple in Newark, not Trenton, Newark, New Jersey. What got me in? Well, actually, I was unfortunately going through a divorce, and I was talking to my friend, Dr. Defoe, and he said that this would be helpful for me because grief is not just about death, but it is about loss. And then beyond that, also as a pastor of a congregation, wanted to be able to better assist members who were dealing with the grief associated with losing loved ones. A couple years ago, we had a lot of string of death in our congregation. And so I wanted to be better able to serve and help, and also those in my community and neighborhood who may not ever care to be connected to a church, but they are suffering from grief, losing job, losing loved one, loss of marriage, etc. And so that's why I went into to get certified as a grief recovery specialist.
Awesome. Juleun, talk to us, and then Stephanie will come to you. And then when you're finished, Stephanie, just share your poem, and then we'll use that as a launching point for our discussion.
Yes. So my grief experience and grief journey, I guess, started when I was a pastor in Mississippi. I had about probably 10 funerals in about the first maybe quarter of my pastoral ministry. And I realized that I needed some help and some counsel. But more formally, my grief training occurred during my CPE journey, and also for my doctoral writing. I wrote my doctoral dissertation about African-American end-of-life care education for clergy and also for the community.
All right. Thank you, sir. Stephanie?
I think my grief journey started too with my CPE process. And since then, it's sort of what I do. It's a large part of what I do. Working as a healthcare chaplain and for such a large facility, we see a lot of it. And it's not just about death, as was said. We have a lot of loss. I see my campus is a very large church, and therefore we're not just dealing with the grief of our patients, we're dealing with the grief of our staff. So because we're in community all the time, It's something that I've had to lean into over the past few years. I thought that it would be a good transition, especially to talk about it. A friend of mine, his name is Kwame Alexander, compiled a community poem, and they published it on NPR's website. And these are all kind of fragments of people talking about what they're learning about grief. So I'm going to jump into that now. And he calls it, "If the Trees Can Keep Dancing, So Can I." What I'm learning about grief is that it sits in the space between laughs, comes in the dark, steals the warmth from the bed covers, threads sleep within thin tendrils. It's a hauntingly familiar song, yet I cannot remember the words. What I'm learning about grief is that it rolls like a heavy mist, settles into the crevices, lingers on the skin, visits, then visits again, lurking under my chair. And when I'm not watching, reaches out her tiny claws and bats my ankles. Grief sneaks up on you. You find yourself on your couch with a well of rage living in the pit of your stomach and nowhere for it to go. And it chokes you. What I'm learning about grief is that it can come like a whisper or storm loud as thunder. It leaves a hollow to be filled with a new planting. And when you wake for another day that feels oddly the same as the last, it crawls right back into your lap, an ocean of tears. So you vary the crawl with the butterfly, the backstroke with breaststroke. At some point, drowning is no longer an option. What I'm learning about grief is that it is a language. Suffering is its own speech. It will not go away just because you won't look it in the eye. This pandemic, this tragedy, this fulcrum of life is a shovel, unearthing secrets we wish would stay buried. I learned that I am ashamed that I love solitude. Hard times call for soft people. There is a softness in stillness, in staying home, in distractions deleted, in a togetherness that stretches great distances. What I'm learning about grief is not found in mint leaves, floating in a glass of tears boiled thrice over. It is an acquired taste which we can never crave. It likes nachos, staying up late, watching murder shows, sleeping in and eating cake for breakfast. It drips like water. It gets in everywhere through the small, unseen fissures in the ceiling. You can ignore it like dust. You can keep yourself too busy with laundry and living. But grief shows up unannounced, like when your husband tells you last October that he's never loved you and wants permission to leave. So you bury the ache into carefully guarded well and wonder if that means the memories have to go there too. What I'm learning about grief is that it can turn you into someone you don't want to be, can help you become someone you never thought you could be, is that it transcends color, race, religion, and gender. It's an old lover that won't leave, trying to hold your hand again, that it aches in the arches of feet, that its mother is lost, its father is changed. Make room for it. What I'm learning about grief is that tiny losses add up. The first missed party my son was to attend, the school days he yearns for with his friends. I tell him it will be over soon. What I'm learning about grief, I learned a long time ago. Knead grief as you would bread. Weave grief as you would thread. There is no vaccine against it. We can't develop antibodies against it. It is something I have and something you have, but in these times, it is something we have. It is anger and denial. It is chaotic laughter from splintered memories. It is jagged cries and single tears. It is numb and indifferent. It is the pinprick of light, promising a slow semblance of normality returned. What I'm learning about grief is to acknowledge its presence, its many forms and guises, then to use it while reaching out, connected to everyone who is braving this same storm. What I'm learning about grief is that it is still learning about me. Wow. Learning that I am strong and resilient, and that if the trees can keep dancing, so can I.
Wow.
We're gonna just let that sit.
Community speaking.
perfect understanding of what grief does. Talk to us. Let's talk a little bit about those range of emotions, those the range of activities, frustrations, confusions, the misnomers that people have. Let's talk to the people about grief and what we've been seeing specifically during this time.
You know, what I'm seeing isn't just, and I'm going to segment what I'm seeing in the hospital from what I'm experiencing personally. I woke up crying over several days and couldn't figure out what it was. Like, I'm like, what's wrong with me? Nobody in my immediate family has died. I have a job. I love my job. My income is fine. My mama is fine. Why am I crying every morning when I get up? And then I realized, that thing again, it snuck up on me. I was grieving the loss of smiles. We're all wearing masks, and I am so glad to be able to just see your faces. Because as what I do, I read body language. I read faces. I read the flicker of a lip. And I can't see that no more. I miss that connection. I miss hugs. I'm a hugger. And I realized that I was grieving things that I couldn't, like things that I couldn't love. So I know that that's what's happening in the world, along with the loss of people. I don't know what we gonna do about that. I don't know what you guys are grieving personally. Freedom, the ability to go eat, but it's all of that, y'all, right now. And we can hyper focus on people who have lost friends and family members. But one of my manifestations of my own grief process in this thing is that I had a dream about people disappearing. I know that's grief too. Just disappearing. I can't hold on to them. I can't keep them. So all of that I know is what I'm experiencing. And if I couldn't name it, if I did not know what it was, I think I'd write about now was crazy personally.
Yeah. Wow. Juleun, talk to us, man. That's powerful.
Well, I think that for me, hearing the poem, it basically depicts not only what I'm experiencing, but it also helps to put some flesh on the thoughts that I have. For some reason, I'm messing up here. But when you start talking about nachos and then you start talking about staying up late at night, I can relate to that. For no reason, watching the news for the first few weeks of this COVID virus, my eyes got tired of looking at my phone before I went to sleep, just wondering what was happening with the virus today, with the team members that I help to manage and those who I work in the hospital with. Then going through the grief of not seeing patients in the hospital, not seeing people in the hospital, being with people whose loved ones died and there was only one family member there. Just like Stephanie said, Chaplain Stephanie said, it is a part of our duty is to be able to read body language, but everybody's face is covered up with a mask. It is the grief of having to learn the new normal. So for about a week, I was kind of knocked out. I said, what am I going to do? How do I relearn my job in order to be effective? And how do I continue in being effective while looking at someone's eyes as opposed to looking in their mask? I'm looking at their face and really learning that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and then trying to be hopeful while still being honest with myself, making sure that my hands are clean, and the whole routine coming home is totally different. But I think the grief and the loss of what was known in 2019, and then now the new normal in 2020 going forward until whenever. So I thank you so much for that poem. And I look forward to talking with you more after this, because this was powerful.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me in the poem was the idea of waking up and eating cake for breakfast. I think one of the conflicting feelings that many of us individually, collectively have had. The thought is, oh, well, now I have some time, so I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to, read all of these books that I always wanted to read. I have a bunch of books behind me. I'm going to catch up on, all of this productivity that I've always wanted to do. And there is this conflicting feeling because, maybe for a short while you are active, you are doing that, and there's something that just weighs you down. And for 2 weeks you are eating healthy and doing well, exercising or reading or getting close to God, whatever that means to you. And then all of a sudden you don't feel like it anymore. You stay up late, watching terrible television and wake up and eat terrible food, and there's this, put yourself in a sense of guilt, like it's wrong. But in reality, there is guilt that is weighing on us collectively. And it is, we don't know how to respond. And so, eating cake or ice cream would be more for me, because I don't like cake, but ice cream is a balanced meal, and get some fruit and some berry. Eating ice cream for breakfast is, sometimes how this crisis has, that's sometimes the response.
Yeah. I think one of the things, and I think maybe we lost Juleun, and he may, hopefully he joins us back on. One of the things that I think is important for us to understand is that a lot of people think during this time there's something for them to solve, that they need to get rid of or overcome their grief. But I think one of the things that we learn, especially as clinicians, and I know you all learned it as chaplains, is we don't solve people's grief. We tend to people's grief. We give them the environment where they can express themselves, where they can experience for themselves the reality or the overarching a pain of what they're going through. Like, talk to us a little bit about how do you all help those people who are grieving, and how do you all free them from this idea that there's something to complete or stages to go through or stuff like that?
Well, I know I often separate doing and being. Mm-hmm. And I will come alongside someone who is grieving, and really, I just be. There is nothing to do. There is nothing to fix. It's to create a safe space to allow everyone to feel what they're feeling and validate that. So, a lot of times we get caught up in doing, and that's what you were talking about, when we feel like it's something to solve. Like we have to overcome it. We have to check some boxes or go down the 5 stages or okay, this is where we are today. And like it's a linear process. But oftentimes we just need to sit in it and allow ourselves to be fully in our humanity. Express it any way we need to until the waves pass.
Yeah.
I think that especially during this pandemic, because we're used to thinking of grief, and people are used to thinking of grief in terms of death only, unfortunately, if someone is not, if they don't have someone that they know personally who has passed, or they don't feel as connected from that standpoint, for many individuals, we're not realizing that we are still grieving, that there is a collective grieving that is happening. And I think that what is significant, what is important in this season, in this time, is to help individuals kind of name it, put words to it, because we are experiencing collective grief as a nation, as a world, really. We are experiencing collective grief. And I think that we have an opportunity in helping professions to help individuals name it, to help them verbalize and express what they are feeling, because even if you haven't had a loved one die from this experience, there's a lot of losses that we all are going through right now that we need to express and give clarity to.
That idea of disenfranchised grief. Yeah, go on, Stephanie.
How do you guys, one of the things that I'm struggling with is the fact that we can't mourn anything. Like, we can't mourn collectively. This is a thing for me. Like people are, it is the death, but we can't mourn loss of job. We're so busy still trying to survive. Where is the space that we can create for people to actually mourn? And if we can't do it now because we're still in survival mode, how are we going to hold that space later? And can we? Like, is this possible?
Yeah, I'll say as a pastor. I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead, man. Go ahead.
No, I think that's a great question, Stephanie. And I really do believe that a lot of the mourning that we will do, I think, as a part of the process of healing. And I think that my fear as a chaplain, as a leader, as a person in ministry or servant, whatever you want to call it, is that we will mourn the death at the moment, but then we will go back into the grief process when we start having all the memorials for people that we cannot attend their funerals, which will start a whole new wave of mourning. And so I cannot say that I have the answer, but I can say that what has helped me is taking moment by moment, carving out. With my team yesterday, we did something interesting. I did not think that was going to last this long, but it was very meaningful. We decided to just debrief the week on our team. And I think one of the blessings of being in the helping profession, being a chaplain, is that we are able to identify, number one, our own needs, and then identify when we need help. And I think that yesterday we talked for about an hour and a half after our worship time, and I did not want to stop. And I heard one of the chaplains that I have on my team talk about 7 or 8 people that have died in his circle of life from COVID in the past week. So I think that we just have to give ourselves permission to grieve in moments. Just today, before I went to church, I have a good friend whose family member died, and he told me something that I didn't think about. I just said, man, his mom died earlier this week. And I said, yo, man, I just want to let you know you have permission to grieve. And I think, Stephanie, that's something that we can do as chaplains or people in the helping profession, and as people who can help each other, is give each other permission to grieve. Because I think, first of all, people don't know, they know they're grieving, but they don't know if it's okay to do. So I think first, just giving permission and then taking it from there.
And a part of it is how our society has grown us up to deal with grief. We think that somehow grief is abnormal, or grief is something that we need to get over, when grief is a result of a loss of a love relationship with someone. And what's hard is, how do I put off the mourning if I can't put off the pain? The pain is there. Well, what do I then do with that? So sort of, well, what do you all suggest people do with that? That pain that they can't necessarily mourn collectively.
And one of the things I was going to mention, and as a pastor of an older congregation, and we're in North Jersey, therefore we're right in kind of the heart of where all of this is happening. The rules for funerals and that kind of thing are strict, to the point where, for a number of individuals, it's 2 people are allowed to view the body and or go to a funeral, and that's it. You can't go to the graveside, etc. So all of the traditional ways that people are used to responding in this kind of scenario have been disrupted. And so one significant thing to do is to help people create new traditions, because that's all it is our tradition on how we respond in a certain situation, at loss of life or what have you. We have to help people find new traditions in this season, because we're not going to be able to respond how we're used to, but we still have to express and we still have to respond, because you can't just hold it in. You have to express it. And so, finding new ways and new traditions in this season on how to respond and express that pain and that those feelings.
Wow. Yeah. What do you think, Stephanie?
I agree that new traditions, it's a struggle to do that in the midst of.
Yeah.
That is a challenge. As you were talking, though, I was in my head imagining some of the things that are getting us through. So we have the Shabbat candles, the little ones with the lights that we usually give to our Jewish patients, that we can use those to remember and create ritual in small groups, so that you gather socially distant people as much as you can, and you take the moment in small groups to remember and to talk about and to let them reflect on their loved ones' lives. I think that's some of what we're doing now, just even amongst ourselves in small groups. We're using things like lights, like reflection and meditation, to just try to find ways to express the loss so that we can go back to our survival mode. It's almost like, I want to say that we're letting off the steam a little bit, just enough to keep going so we don't explode.
Yeah. Wow.
I think for me, I live in Florida, and Florida is always in the news around this time of season for voting for something, and our state is opened up. And one of the things that I think that there's accompanied with grief, there's a false sense of security that's being created as soon as something opens. It feels like everything's back to normal, and I think it's a glossing over of the feelings. And I think that with a lot of as things continue to open up and obviously get better, and progressively for economic purposes, I think that there's also the need to transcend a lot of the economics and go right to the heart of the matter. But I think giving people questions, giving them a supply of things to talk about, I think that we'll find that people are open. At least that's what I'm finding in my hospital. People who are not spiritual, have no desire for the chaplain, no desire for anything remotely spiritual, are asking, how do we get through this? Do you have any material? Do you have any literature? How can we be of support to each other? But I think that just as crucial as getting through the grief moment and grieving collectively is also the bond that's created through the trauma, but then also how we go forward also is just as meaningful, because we're going to deal with a lot of moral injury, a lot of PTSD, a lot of remorse, a lot of regret, and a lot of guilt.
Yeah. And speaking of that, Juleun, I think one of the things that we're going to notice is there's going to be a lot of rehashing should've, could've,
Yes.
would've. Well, what if I didn't do this, or didn't go there? Would my mom or my dad or my relatives still be there? And so it produces even secondary grief or secondary losses. So how do we sort of work with people to help them grieve in a more healthy manner? I know there's plenty of things out there that people say to people to try to encourage them that don't really help. God knows best, or or you're gonna get better from this, or this is gonna help you grow, or somehow I know what you're going through. Like, how do we help people better? How do we learn what it is to say to help people grieve in a more healthy manner, giving them permission to grieve in their unique way?
Okay, so pick me.
Yes, all you.
I always think about this in terms of Job's friends. Job had lost everything. His friends came and sat with him in silence in the beginning. They didn't say anything. And I always think that that's when they were the best friends. Because the minute they started talking, foolishness occurred. No, seriously. So sometimes when somebody is grieving, shut up.
That's right.
Stop talking. There is nothing you can say to fix it. Don't try to make it better. Don't paint a silver lining over it. You know, Brene Brown's video always cracks me up. You know, when I think it's on empathy, when somebody's like in a hole and the other person looks down and goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You want a sandwich?" Don't minimize it. Sit in it. Remember Job's friends in the beginning. Do likewise. Let that silence lead you.
Because ultimately, nothing you say is going to bring that person back. The only way to solve it is them coming back, and nothing you say can bring them back. So presence is important. There's productivity in silence. Go on, Julian. I see something burning in you, man.
No, I agree. And I've heard some of the craziest things that people say at the time of when somebody has a loss. And I think people are really trying to say the right thing, but the best thing is just to be quiet. You know, I share with people, just say I came to be with you. And I think when you say I came to be with you, it elicits the fact that you're desiring to support, but you really don't know what to say. And I think that too often people, unfortunately, and the thing that came to my mind, and I don't know if you want to dive this deep, but I know Carl's a deep thinker, but I think sometimes religion can complicate our grief. And we put a gloss over everything. That's the thing I was thinking, but I was like, should I say it?
Please
and
do.
And I think that even being Adventist can complicate our grief because we look so much forward to the second coming that we forget about living here, present on earth, having pain, having anger, having the emotions. And if Jesus can cry over Lazarus, knowing that he could heal and deliver him, then what about us? And I think that the super spiritual nature of so many people is nauseating to me, especially at this moment, when people try to act as if, you know, what Ellen G. White said in Great Controversy about everybody rising from the grave. I believe it, right? I believe it. Please don't take that. Whoever's chatting, don't chat about me there, okay? But chat this. The fact and reality that we are all human first, and we are Christian second, and then our religion and culture identifiers. The other thing I think that we are have to talk about too is that all of us on this call we grieve from a similar lens. I cannot say that we grieve the same way because we're 4 different people, but we grieve from a similar lens. We have a similar culture. We have a similar religious history, similar, not the same, but we also have to be considerate or consider those who are Asian, who don't want anybody to be around them when they grieve, Caucasians who grieve in a very short and very, very limited way. And then there are Eastern cultures who take days and weeks and months to grieve over the same thing. So I think that the complication of grief is going to be multifaceted. But at least for me, I just don't like all the religious jargon, all the cliches, and all the stuff that may accompany the Seventh-day Adventist faith, while being helpful, can also be harmful and prohibitive.
And the correcting of what others think about death, grief, whatever. Because that culturally, we have that kind of because we think we have the truth.
Yes.
You know, we're happy to correct others in the middle of their grief who want to comfort themselves with, my loved one is looking down, my loved one is an angel. They have language for it that is comforting for them. And we tend to, as SDA folk who have the written truth, we will carry that directly to them in the middle to remind them that their loved ones are sleeping in the grave and know nothing.
That's right.
and expect that to be comforting.
Yes.
And have the nerve to say it at conclusionary rituals or funerals. Like, you preach a state of the dead message at a funeral? No, go away. Please, Carl, you go on, because you lose your job. I'm going to keep mine.
I've seen it at funerals. People want to actually correct someone while a funeral is taking place. Tell them, no, loved one isn't in heaven. And so, I think that the key is people need to know that you're coming beside them on the journey. You're with them, and it's not just for your own benefit or because you're trying to convert someone or prove your point or any of that. If we have to, as humans, just give people a safe space. And if we come beside people and say, look, you have a safe space with me, and I'm not just here for today, I'm here for the journey with you, then it gives people the opportunity to to bleed in front of you, and you're there to be there with them, whatever that journey means. And when people realize that it is safe to do so, that's the beginning where healing can start to take place, because people can first bleed, instead of trying to fix people as if we have, all the answers, all the solutions.
The only fix is to bring that person back to the person that they've lost. That's the only fix.
Right.
There's nothing we can do there's nothing to do. Grief is not something that we fix.
Right.
It's not even something that we like. The idea of, so I had a client come in, she was crying, and of course I give my clients the space to do whatever they need. She was talking about how her loss of her mother had just happened. And I'm sitting there, and because I was inquisitive, I was like, so when did it happen? And she says 10 years ago. To her, time stopped because her world ended when she lost her mother. And we don't understand sometimes that people go through, life changes. It never returns to normalcy. Normal has to be recreated. There's no returning. There's no getting over it. We sit and we deal with our grief as individuals, as not only as individuals, but we deal with it. We deal with it in a way where it's not even something. I can't even find the words to sort of describe what I'm trying to say. It's so personal that you can't bring to me what your experience with grief is and think that your experience will even help me through mine. So what do you all think about that? Let's stick with a little bit more with this individual nature of grieving. Like, what do you all think about this? Have you all seen that people grieve differently, so that individuals who think that they need to grieve based off a pattern, they know that grief is personal. Grief is as personal as the love that you had for the person or the thing or the job that you've lost.
Yeah. One of the things that I always tell individuals is that grief is based on relationship, whether it's with a person or relationship with a job or with an animal, pet, whatever. Whatever is lost, it's a relationship that is broken. And because I don't have that relationship with that item or that person or that animal or that whatever, there's no way that I could ever know that experience, that feeling, because it's individualized. It's based on that relationship. I might have had a relationship with a parent or a child, but I don't have your relationship with your parent or your child or your job or your what have you. That's why it's a journey that person is on. It's individualized, and that's why we have to come along on that journey with them to, that's the best we can do, is say, hey, I'm with you on this journey, but they have that experience. It's individual. It's based on their own relationship.
I think, though, that we can find points of connection.
Yeah.
So while we do not have the exact same experience, empathy becomes the place where there's enough in probably my wounds and my bruises to kind of feel some of your pain if I'm listening deeply enough. I can simply receive it as is, uncut, unfiltered, and hold on to that with the person that I'm in, that I'm with, or that I'm ministering to, or that I'm journeying alongside. I just think it's important for me not to superimpose my experience upon them. Like what fixed it for me is not the answer for you.
I don't want to open up a whole new trail to get lost down, but what you just said just reminded me. I was meeting with our youth. We have a youth discussion every Friday evening, and we were talking about empathy and talking about exactly what you were just saying. And I just wanted to point out, in this time, we're often talking about grief from adult perspectives. And just want to point out that our children right now, and myself as a parent of teenagers and so forth, our children right now are also grieving significantly. And and they even more so do not have, don't know how to formulate that, what they are experiencing. And so we really need to be careful and conscious of our children during this season and beyond. Obviously, it's not just like it's a 2020 thing, but this is significantly affecting our kids.
Now you want to talk about the high school seniors. I really am in my feelings for people who are graduating from anything, not just high school, but especially high school, because that's a special graduation. There's all kind of things that happen in that year that they have just missed, that they can never get back, right? That's really gone. You know, in your mind, you've worked for all of this, and the time that you want to celebrate the biggest with the most people, you've been robbed. That is straight robbery. And a person who is 17 or 18 years old, you're right. They don't have, I think I would just be angry.
Yeah, exactly.
Express itself. I wouldn't be crying about it. I would just be mad, sulking somewhere. And, if we see that in our young people, let us not just automatically correct it.
Yeah.
Tell them, oh, you don't feel like that. Fix your face. Help them process what is actually happening to them. Honor their own grief.
And I think you're so right. When you talk about the achievement level, I've lived in some places around the country where high school is the apex for someone's achievement. And some people, that's all they aspire to. And I'll never forget having a conversation in a very southern state where I was working and living. And I said, "Oh, what school did you go to?" They said the name of the school. I said, "That sounds like a high school." They said, "Yeah, I graduated then," and they were proud of that. One thing that has helped, that I found to be helpful, and what our kids, as you've talked, Carl, Pastor Brewer, is it's weird calling you Pastor Brewer, but at any rate,
I'm Carl, man. I've always been Carl.
But at any rate, one thing that has been very unique for our family is that, man, our kids have been drawing and doing art and doing things that have been creative ways to express themselves. Yeah. So I would just offer, it may not be art, it could be poetry, it could be some other creative form, but with the caveat and parenthetical element that whatever they do online is going to stay with them and their history forever. Yeah. So I would say whatever is going to be grieving, I would say grief should be productive and also should be creative for each age group, but especially for those who are younger to express themselves. I don't know. We have child life specialists at our hospitals. Do you have child life specialists, Stephanie?
I do not.
Okay. And one of the things they do, we had a family a couple weeks ago who was a 30-something-year-old mom, metastatic breast cancer, 4 kids. And what they do in our hospitals, that they do handprints. The mom was rapidly declining, ended up dying 2 days after the kids did the handprints together. And the handprints are a way for the family to memorialize the moment, but also for them. And I'm telling you, I wrote in my journal even this morning that seeing those 4 kids, the mom was bringing them close to her chest because she knew she was on BiPAP like 100%. And she knew that she did not have long. And just being able to see that they had some kind of creative outlet helped to de-escalate the situation, but did not take away the grief. And I think that's one thing I want to say, that even the practices, the interventions that we would offer from a grief perspective are not designed to take away the grief. They're designed to help to be a part of the healing process.
And I think that's also a very important, Julian, or to add to that is this idea that we have to make sure that as we look at our children's behaviors changing, that we don't associate this as, all of us, when we grieve, we get confused, we may get angry, we may run through a gamut of emotions. They're dealing with some of the same things, the same frustrations. This loss of normalcy is probably very hard for them. And let's be honest, as parents now entering into teaching is hard for us too, if we're to be honest.
Yeah.
So I want us to get to some of our questions, but I need you all to do this. I have a friend and a member of mine. This is her first Mother's Day without her mother.
Okay.
And the stinging reality that there's no Mother's Day card to send. And I'm blessed to still have mine. I can't fathom not having that. What do we say, or what do we do to help people in the immediacy right now? What are the practical tips that we can give people to help start to tend to their grief?
I yield to Stephanie.
Well, I was hoping that Carl was going with that, but okay. I think for someone who has a loss right now, they need to talk about the person.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if I had somebody who has lost a relative and it's an anniversary, I want to create this space to hear about all the things they loved about that person.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let me know that person with you. And if I didn't know them, tell me all the things that made your relationship special. Take the time to relive it. Spend some time honoring their memory by relighting it, so to speak, and highlighting it. I think that's helpful. Don't hide it. Don't put it away. Just because mom is no longer there in physical present form doesn't mean that the feelings and the relationship is over. The relationship still continues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Carl, share with us some practical things.
That was spot on. That was exactly what I was about to say. I think that, and there's many ways to do it in terms of creativity, because if you have someone who's musical, you could write a song, a tribute. The reason that the card is an expression of love that we send. You can still express love, because even though that individual is not around, your love for that individual is still around. You haven't stopped. Your love for that individual hasn't ceased. So you can still express it through card, through song, through writing a note, through making a video, a tribute, what have you. You can still express that those feelings and those emotions for that individual, however creative you want to do it. And with modern technology, you can create memory that literally will last forever.
Mm-hmm. I've been seeing some real interesting stuff online where people are putting together like the tribute video, right, where you've got the music, you've got some voiceover, you've got some pictures that you've dug out of the albums, and then you literally put together a package that you can kind of watch just yourself and share with others who were close to you.
I think, and I mentioned earlier, in terms of funerals and this new norm where you can't have normal traditions that we're used to for, expressing that grief during a funeral service and so forth. I think because of that and this season, I think it's a good idea to create those kinds of memories via video, et cetera. That way you have those kinds of expressions for a lifetime.
I don't know why I feel moved to say this, but it is true. I think number one, you got to do interventions. But I think the other thing is that, man, we have to prepare for this as well. I think, sir, there are some people who go through grief, they go through loss, and they still are paying on the funerals for their loved ones months and months and months later without proper preparation. No advance directive, no advanced care planning, nothing. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice, especially in our community, without having that. And I think that part of the grief that we have, and part of the grief people have when their parents or their loved ones die, is, man, I should have prepared. I should have done something else. I should have gotten the paperwork together. And I think that's just important as the celebratory moments, but also the reflective times to tell the story to others of what we can do to assist others through these moments. So while the sting of death is still there, the stinger comes out because I have done some things to prepare. So I think that preparation is key, but I also think that writing a letter is an amazing opportunity to express love and care for that person, putting it in a special place. That's what I share with those who I encounter, clients or patients and families. Write a letter, donate to a cause, help someone else out, and be able to put together. There's some preachers wives, and you might be watching this, you might be a preacher's wife. My utmost for his highest is a collection of books, a collection of sermons that were printed by the pastor's wife, Oswald Chambers' wife. Oswald Chambers could not buy a bucket. No one wanted to hear what he had to say, but his wife printed those sermons, and she lived off of the rest of the interest and sales or proceeds of that for the rest of her life. So I think turn the grief into something potentially profitable. And I'm saying that today, obviously, but turn it into something that's going to be able to assist you in going forward. So grieve, but heal at the same time.
I really like your focus on preparation, because I really, it cannot be said enough that folk in our community do not want to act as if anything is ever going to happen.
That's right.
We are all human, and there is only one way out of this place. And we are all saying we going someplace else, but there's only one door that we pass through unless we're ready for translation. Okay. So if we all need to understand that, especially when it comes to death, it's going to happen. Take some of the burden out of it by pre-thinking and preparing. You know, I know that I take care of my 95-year-old mother, and we're ready. All of the stuff is lined up. Even I had her jot down her funeral stuff. Her funeral, I don't want to talk about it to her. The truth is I don't want to talk about it, because I don't want to have to walk through that with her yet. But I told her, and I asked her to write her wishes down, put it where I can find it, so that when it comes time, I can put my hands on the things, even though I really didn't want to have to process it too deeply with her in advance. You know, it's important that we have these conversations. The advance directives, the living will, the medical power of attorney, understand who you want to make your decisions. When all of those things are in place, then the day you have to go into the hospital or the day that the thing happens, you can really leave yourself free to deal with the feelings you have, because your processes and procedures are already laid down.
Wow. And I love your mom, Stephanie. She's the only person I ever met brought her dog to prayer meeting. Awesome lady. Awesome. Great. Yeah. Anyway, so let's take some of our questions, and then we'll come back with sort of parting words. This was one of the questions that came through a little earlier. And if you have a question, just please just paste your question in the chat. It says, any suggested resources for people who don't know how to adapt to that type of grieving process and may not have access to a chaplain, especially a healthcare provider, calling family and telling them that their loved one is gone?
I know that we have, we're actually developing a supportive kit, so to speak, for having these conversations from medical professionals, especially having to have these conversations with families. Like, we're accustomed to having the conversation after the family has been notified. But especially in this time, the doctors that have to, like Pierre, that have to make these phone calls, they too are struggling. So we are actually working on coaching and helping them to tap into their own feelings so that they can have better conversations with the family members, and then taking the pause after they've had it. You know, we call the pause after every death in the hospital, especially one where there was CPR, or it's a code blue, or it's a crisis. There are a lot of people that run in to try to save their life. At the end of that, we call the pause. The pause is meant to hold that space for everyone, right? To process what has just happened. And so it's the moment of silence, but we also honor the person whose life has been lost, the human that they were and the connections they had, and then the medical professionals who worked heroically to save the life. In that moment of reflection, you know, it brings the anxiety down, it brings the adrenaline down, and allows people to connect with their humanity, so that when they have to call and say, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, they are connecting with the humanity on the other end of that line. And then when they put up that phone, when they hang up that phone, to have another pause for themselves, to feel whatever it is they're feeling, to take that breath, to say that prayer, to inhale and exhale life so that they can go on.
Yeah. Juleun, you just shared a resource with me. Talk a little bit about this resource, this COVID Ready Communication Playbook.
So the COVID Ready Communication Playbook it comes from Vital Talk. .org, and I put it in the chat for people who may want it. It's a resource that I found and something that was adapted by our health system. This one is straight from Vital Talk, though, and it basically gives people questions, comments, and ways to to start a conversation on grief for those who may not be in the helping profession and may not know the first question or what are good questions to ask. I would invite whoever would use this resource to maybe start out just asking one or two questions. You don't have to ask all the questions in order to feel as if you're accomplishing the goal. But there are some great questions on there that talk about how do you feel today? What is it like to be you? There's some excellent questions that I found to be helpful at this time, and that's what I would share.
Okay. Let's get a few more of these questions. I know that one had come from Pastor Howard Duncan, and he talked about, he's asking about support groups for the COVID grieving process. And then also talk to us a little bit about the power of support groups in helping individuals tend to their grief.
Well, I would just say, and that as pastor, I've run support groups just in general in our church for grieving. For those who are grieving. And of course, we don't differentiate whether it's grieving the loss of a loved one or grieving loss of a marriage, grieving the loss of anything, because it's about relationship and depth of that relationship. I think obviously COVID is such a unique experience in that everyone is grieving the same experience, just causing different kinds of losses within a loss. But I think that it still would be very, very helpful in churches. And again, I'm a pastor, so I'm speaking from that perspective, to have an opportunity for people to express themselves and to help give voice to those losses. I think that there are some losses that we are experiencing in COVID that people aren't realizing is causing grief. To me, in my opinion, I think one of the biggest is just the loss of control. We felt like we had control over our lives, our schedule,
Yes, sir.
where we go, et cetera, et cetera. And this one experience just let us know that you're not in control. And I think in some ways we have to help people control what they are in control of. That is a part of what we can do. But I think that the loss of control for so much of our life needs to have a voice, and we need to express it. And so I think, once one person starts to share that, people start to say, yeah, I feel that. And so, we run those and we are, the intent is as soon as we can, face to face. And I've never done this virtually. I'm sure you all who do this all the time have probably done a lot of teletherapy and all of that sort of stuff. But we're hoping when we can be face to face, we'll be running groups again in our church dealing with this sort of stuff.
All right, here's another one. This comes from another pastor in the conference, Ron Williams. Is there a process of grieving differently when death is tied to a violent trauma versus an unexpected natural course of action? What practical steps does one take to support the person or family? Wow. Dr. Williams.
Well, thank you, Dr. Williams, for the easy question. Definitely not easy. I think that for me, having dealt with trauma and my residency was in a trauma hospital. And I think that, first of all, you have to allow give the person space. I think that with prolonged death, with cancer deaths or expected deaths, I think that there's a part of the grieving process that people go through beforehand. So case in point, there might be a husband whose wife has cancer and everybody's wondering why he's not crying at the funeral. How did he live his life so good after, and why is he getting married so quick? That might be somebody's testimony watching this. I don't know. But the reality is that there are a lot of people who grieve the whole time while that person is alive. I think for sudden death and for trauma, you support that family by giving them rituals and honoring that person's life, hearing that person's story, and not judging the story based on the death.
Yeah.
If I can just add one thing, and I'm not sure if he's specifically referring to the young man who was running and was shot, etc. But one of the things that we are seeing, and it's very common, especially with national news showing us all of these violent crimes and so forth, and we grieve even if we aren't even related. Sometimes we think that the actions of getting or seeking justice is equal to grieving. It is not. And so we kind of have to separate that so that people understand, just because you fought to get justice, get someone behind bars, or, et cetera, and made phone calls, that's not dealing with your own emotions related to losing that loved one. And I think as if people who are in help professions, we need to also help people face their own emotions with regard to losing their loved one.
I concur with both of y'all.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming. Just give us some parting words, some parting shots. Just take 30 seconds, 45 seconds to just share with someone who may be hurting, going through something difficult at this time, to just encourage them on this journey of grief. We'll start with you, Stephanie. We'll go to Juleun, then Carl. And then Stephanie, I'm going to ask you to pray for us to close. And by all means, if you're watching and you're hurting, or if you've lost someone and you're having a difficult time dealing with it, just type your name, their name in the chat, and maybe perhaps Chaplain Stephanie, if you could just pray for them, not specifically, but just those names that are put out in the chat. All right.
What I keep thinking about everything we cannot control and our collective sense of powerlessness. So right now, I think my hope is that God grants us literally the serenity to accept what we cannot change, the courage to change what we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I think that at this point, we're powerless over a lot. But there are things that we do have control over. We have control over how we respond. We can take positive action to support each other, to love each other, to extend grace to each other, to listen to each other. So I think that right now it's important that we know the difference between what's out of our power and what's in our power, and claim what we can claim.
Yeah. Thank you.
Stephanie, that was a powerful comment. And the only thing I would say, as you, just to connect the thought, is that give yourself some grace. There's so many of you who have assisted loved ones, been a caregiver, been a supporter, been an encourager, but give yourself some grace. There's some days that are going to be pretty bad days, very uncomfortable, but I would say give yourself some grace. And then most of all, give yourself permission to grieve. You do not have to have it all together, but you are human, and God loves you, and God is surrounding you. And there are people who care about you. And thank you so much for watching today.
There is so much to divide us as humans. From sports, I'm a big sports fan, and obviously I root for and against teams. There's so much that divides us, unfortunately, politically, religion. If we learn anything from this global experience right now, it's that we are one race. We are human. And because we're human and we're on this journey together, let's try to be more understanding, less divisive. Let's give people space on their journey to feel what they feel, to experience and grow how they need to. Let's be more gracious, more understanding, because we're all on this journey together.
Yeah, Stephanie, just before Chaplain Grant, you pray, I just want to share with you all that next week we will be having a follow-up discussion. This is our mental health discussion. Next week, Saturday, we had to change the time to 5 o'clock. We have 3 very good clinicians that are coming to talk to us about mental and emotional health. Janelle Phillip, Jamar Moore, Armina Dominique will be having a discussion next week on these same platforms at 5 o'clock p.m. And the reason we're doing this is because the conference is going to be having their discussion on COVID-19 with the panelists that you see there on the screen at 3 o'clock. And so we want to invite you to join us for that as we not only deal with mental health, but also as we join the rest of the conference in that COVID-19 discussion. We want to thank you for joining us. By all means, if you've watched this and this was a blessing to you, by all means, share it so those that may need to hear it can also hear it. Stephanie, if you don't mind, if you'd pray for us as we close.
Absolutely. Father God, we thank you for bringing us together today. We thank you for all represented on this call and for all who are watching. God, now I ask you, for those that are grieving, that you provide the comfort and the peace that surpasses all understanding. God, even though we are physically separate, keep us socially close so that we can tend to each other's wounds and we can see each other's issues and bear each other's burdens, carrying them collectively to you so that we can keep going, stay strong. God, for all of those who have lost a loved one due to this pandemic or otherwise in this time when we cannot gather together, Lord, I ask a special blessing upon them. I ask you to give them an extra measure of your grace and your peace. God, comfort us, strengthen us, keep us faithful in this time because we ask it in your name. Amen.